His Excellency Amit Narang, Ambassador of India to the Sultanate of Oman, Madam Divya Narang, spouse of His Excellency the Ambassador, His Excellency Syed Nuh Al Busaidi, Dr. Ismail Serjali, Sheikh Anil Kimji, Kiran Bhai, Professor James Onley, our esteemed speaker of the day, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Very good evening to one and all. On behalf of the Embassy of India, it is my privilege to welcome you this evening to the fourth lecture of our landmark series, From MANDVI to Muscat, Indian Community and the Shared History of India and Oman, navigating through the history of India-Oman relations. As we begin today's event, I kindly invite the Ambassador of India to the Sultanate of Oman, His Excellency Sri Amit Narang, for his welcome address.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, namaskar, assalamu alaikum, and a warm welcome to the Embassy of India. It's always a pleasure to welcome all of you, and it's a great pleasure today that we are doing so as we convene the fourth lecture in our M2M series, Muscat to MANDVI to Muscat. This initiative was conceived by the Embassy in conjunction with the National Museum and the Oman Historical Association, and of course with the generous support of the Hindu Mahajan community, the Indian community. The idea being to bring back history of our two wonderful nations back to the front pages. We are all aware of this history, but I think it is important that we relook at this history, revisit that history, and bring out shared lessons which can be applicable to our present journeys as well. The three lectures we have had so far have been very illuminating. Professor Radha Bhakar started us off with the first lecture at the National Museum. We had a lecture by the Indian professor, Dr. Chaya Goswami, who traveled from India. We had a lecture from Sri Sanjeev Sanyal, the member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, who incidentally is also bringing a stitch ship from Gujarat, from MANDVI to Muscat, sometime in 2025. And I'm delighted, therefore, that we have today Captain Salah Al-Jabri, who was the captain of Jewel of Muscat. I think in recent memory, perhaps the only stitch ship to sail from Oman successfully all the way to Singapore. And of course, I welcome Dr. Khamis, the CEO of Oman Sail as well, for his support. So today we have the fourth lecture, and I am delighted to welcome on your behalf Dr. Professor James Onley from the American University in Sharjah, a distinguished academic. He has done a phenomenal amount of work on the history of Arabia in general, on India and Arabia, and the trading networks. And today we will hear from him his perspectives on how and what this history has been and what are the factors which have shaped these exchanges for many years, many centuries, I should say. So I thought for us and some of the people who are joining us for the first time and friends of the media for this MANDVI to Muscat series, the M2M, and this M2M, by the way, could easily be Meluha to Majan. I think that was the old names of the two civilizations. So I think it's quite apt that we are talking about MANDVI to Muscat. Of course, the idea is not just we're looking at the history of MANDVI and Muscat alone. It's just a way of saying we are talking about the history of India and Oman and Indian community in Oman. So three characteristics of this lecture series. The first is that it is a lecture series with a global outreach. So we wanted to break out of the expertise that is available within Oman, and we thought we will reach out to academics and professors and individuals who have done research wherever they are. And we have had and we will have expertise from within Oman, from India, like Dr. James Onley coming all the way from Sharjah. We will have two personalities coming all the way from the US in the next few lectures. So the idea is to pool together this global knowledge on India and Oman and put them together as part of this lecture series. The second interesting feature is that with every lecture in the series, there is an academic part, but there is also an oral history part, which to me is much more interesting, to be honest. And we have had in the past 3 lectures members of the 3 Indian families who came and talked about the history of their families. We started off with the Purecha family, and Dhruv gave a lovely lecture on the history, starting with stalwarts such as Ratansi Purushottam. We have had Varun, who presented a picture of the Khimji family, and last time we had a pen portrait of the Shah Nagardas family. And frankly, very interesting anecdotes and very interesting nuggets come out of this initiative. Today, we will be hearing from Munir Bhai Toprani, who is also a representative of one of the oldest living families in Oman. And the idea is to capture these nuggets also as part of this endeavor. And I don't want to spoil the Munir Bhai's presentation, but I was talking to one of his friends recently, and an Omani gentleman, he told me that once upon a time when Munir Bhai's ancestors left for a time, they went back from Oman to India, they left their cow in this Omani family's home. Now, this is a very important part of history. This is not recorded in any book, but this history has to be also recorded because this really shows the friendship that existed between Indian and Omani families. So I'm sure, Munir Bhai, you will talk about this. But this is, for me, equally very important, the oral history part. And the third part, the feature of this lecture series is that everything is on record. So all these that we are talking today will be live streamed on YouTube, and a permanent record will be created, the digital record, of course. And then eventually we will come back and try and compile all these lectures, all these presentations in the form of a book, hopefully soon after the lecture series concludes. So I actually also wanted to welcome, but our guests are running a bit late, but I should mention this because it's very topical. Because today, coincidentally, we also have the head of the India's National Archives with us in Oman. And they are visiting for a bilateral visit, and they had a very good visit yesterday with their counterparts. And a very good new project has also been conceptualized on the archive side to do a joint presentation and the preparation of a book, etc. Hopefully, we will take that forward as well. So hopefully we'll have a very interesting lecture, ladies and gentlemen. Next up on the 8th of March, we will have the 5th lecture by Dr. Sandhya, who will be presenting a picture of the women in Indian community in Oman. I thought that should be very, very interesting. So we'll all gear up for that. And last but not the least, we also have the pleasure of a painting exhibition, which is not really linked to this idea, but we are very happy that a group of Indian women artists who got together and they wanted to present this exhibition inspired by the inauguration of the temple in India. I think as a sense of cultural rejuvenation and a sense of communal harmony, and they have put together some beautiful paintings. So after the lecture concludes, all of us will take a look at that as well. So thank you once again, and welcome to the Embassy of India. We're looking forward to hearing from you, Professor Onley. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our esteemed speaker of the day, Professor James Onley, who has flown in from Sharjah, will be sharing his insightful views on India and Arabia, connections across Millenia. Professor James Onley, a renowned historian, is currently the Professor of History from the Department of International Studies at the American University in Sharjah. He specializes in the history and heritage of the Gulf region, the Gulf's historical connections with South Asia, archives and archival digitization, and digital humanities. Professor James Onley holds a PhD in modern history. He also holds many awards and honors. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, may I kindly invite Professor James Onley to deliver the lecture.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my thanks to the Indian Embassy for inviting me to give this talk today. It is a great honor, and I'm really pleased to see such a fantastic turnout. My paper will examine how nearly 5,000 years of connections between India, Oman, and the Water Gulf have left a deep imprint on their cultural DNA. India and Arabia are not just neighbors. They are cultural cousins, as my talk will show. Oh, and how do I switch? I press this. I just press this, is that right? Okay. Okay. My paper is divided into 8 parts, as you can see here. An overview, sailing between the Gulf and India, maritime trade, ancient trade links, the India trade, Gulf imports from India before oil and their incorporation into Gulf material culture, Indian communities in the Gulf, and Arab communities in India. Part 1, overview. India and Arabia have been interconnected for time immemorial, despite being geographically separate. Before the oil era, the Gulf Arabs have always looked towards the Indian Ocean for their supplies and sources of prosperity. Their maritime orientation towards India above all has profoundly influenced their history and culture. The Gulf has long been enmeshed in the movement of goods, peoples, and cultures between East and West. From the ancient maritime trade routes between the Indus Valley, Dilmun, as ancient Bahrain was known, and Mesopotamia in the 26th century BC, to the global air and sea networks linking the Gulf to the water world today. Throughout this time, India has always loomed large over the horizon, attracting most of the Gulf's exports and supplying much of what made life possible in the days before oil. This Times article from 1945 aptly describes the importance of India to the Gulf. Quote, "The Persian Gulf has closer ties with India than with Iraq, Egypt, and the Levant. Most of its trade is with India. Food supplies come from India, and Bombay is the market of pearls before they are sent to Europe. The number of Arabs who travel from the Gulf to Egypt is small in comparison to the number who pay regular and lengthy visits to India. The political future of India is a matter of much more interest here than the situation in Palestine." Today, the Indian connection is more apparent than ever, with the presence of over 8 million Indian expats living and working in the GCC states, giving the neighborhoods in which they predominate the feel of Indian towns. My talk provides an overview of the fascinating yet sometimes forgotten connections stretching across the Indian Ocean between the Indian subcontinent and the Gulf, from shared cultures to shared empires. It serves as a reminder of how important they were to each other and why their recent strengthening of ties is less a new strategy and more a renewal of an ancient relationship. Part 2. Ships have been sailing across the Indian Ocean between the Indian subcontinent and the Gulf since the invention of ocean-going vessels in the 3rd millennium BC. The earliest account of Indian ships in the Gulf is this cuneiform tablet recording the words of the Akkadian king Sargon, who ruled from 2334 to 2279 BC, in which he mentions the ships of Mahulla, the Akkadian name for the Indus Valley civilization anchored at the city of Akkad in Mesopotamia. Archaeological evidence suggests that trade contacts were established as early as 2600 BC. Before steamships linked India and the Gulf in the 1860s, sailing was governed by the Indian Ocean's rainy southwest monsoon and its dry northeast monsoon. There were 2 sailing seasons in the Gulf for dhows heading to India. First, the start of the southwest monsoon during the mid-March to mid-May, and second, the end of the southwest monsoons during mid-August to late September. In between these 2 periods, during the height of the southwest monsoon, from late May to mid-August, India's ports were closed due to the strong winds and heavy rains in India. The entire northeast monsoon, from early October to mid-March, was good for westbound dhows sailing from India to the Gulf. Dhows followed one of two routes across the Indian Ocean. The safer coastal route that you see here, staying within sight of the Arabian Sea's northern shore, or the riskier direct route, sailing directly across the Arabian Sea. With a favorable wind, a dhow sailing from here in Muscat to Bombay could take about 2 weeks, while a journey from Kuwait to Bombay could take 3 to 4 weeks. Sailing times also varied by ship size and type. Without a favorable wind, sailing times could easily double. The sailing season from mid-August to mid-May conveniently dovetailed with the pearling and date harvest seasons of May to mid-September, when India's ports were closed to shipping. The sailing, pearling, and date harvest seasons were economically interconnected in several ways. First, pearls and dates were Eastern Arabia's main exports to India, and the bulk of the region's imports from India were purchased with the resulting profits. Second, at the end of the pearling season, pearling dhow crewmen with the necessary skills joined the crews of cargo dhows engaged in the India trade. And third, at the start of the pearling season, some cargo dhows returning from India were redeployed as pearling vessels. The Gulf's ancient maritime connections with the Indian subcontinent are symbolized by the stories of Sinbad the Sailor, associated with the 1001 Nights, a collection of folktales dating from the Abbasid Empire. Sinbad is a fictional Arab merchant from Baghdad, the Abbasid capital, who sailed from Basra to India and the wider Indian Ocean during the reign of the Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid, who ruled from the late 8th century to the early 9th century. In his first voyage, Sinbad describes his visit to India as follows. Quote, "One day I went to see King Maharajan and found him with a group of Indians. I saluted them, and they returned my salutation, welcomed me, and asked me about my country. Then I asked them about theirs, and they told me that they consisted of various races. One is called the Kshatriyas, who are the noblest of their races, and who oppress no one, nor inflict violence on anyone. Another is called the Brahmins, who abstain from wine but live in joy, sport, merriment, and prosperity, possessing horses, camels, and cattle. They told me, moreover, that Indians consist of 72 castes, and I marveled at that." In Persian, Sinbad means the wind of Sind. Sind is the region of the Indian subcontinent closest to the Gulf, as well as the Indian name for the Arabian Sea before the Arab conquest of Sind in the 8th century, the Sindhu Sagar, or Sindhi Sea. Sinbad, therefore, may have been a nickname referring to the winds that carried Gulf dhows to and from India for millennia. The Sinbad stories likely originated from medieval sailors' travel accounts like those of Barzug Amram Hormuzi, a famous 10th century ship's captain, in his famous Book of Wonders of India that you see here. In 1980-81, the British explorer Tim Severin famously reenacted these accounts by sailing a replica of a medieval dhow from Oman to India, and then to China, a journey of 9,600 kilometers lasting 8 months, in which he immortalized in his book, The Sinbad Voyage. In 1862, the British India Steam Navigation Company introduced regular Bombay Gulf service, shortening the sailing time between Bombay and Basra from several weeks to just 7 days, and strengthening the links between India and the Gulf region. But dhow journeys have continued to the present day, powered by wind until the mid-20th century, and thereafter powered by motors. Part 3. Until the 1950s and the dawn of the oil era, the Gulf's maritime merchants regarded Indian ports as closer in terms of travel time and more important economically than any West Asian city. For them, it was Bombay they knew, not Beirut, Calicut, not Cairo, Surat, not Suez. Before the advent of modern air travel in the mid-20th century, therefore, the port towns of the Gulf belonged more to the Indian Ocean world than to the Mediterranean Middle East. Consider, for instance, this sample survey of Eastern Arabian trade with India. The intensity of Eastern Arabia's trade with India, shown here, was the case for millennia until the 1950s. After the advent of oil and the resulting economic reorientation of Eastern Arabia towards the Arab world and the West in the 1950s and 60s, India was gradually surpassed as the Gulf's main trading partner. Since the late 2000s, however, GCC trade with India has returned to its historic levels of intensity, but the tables have turned. Now the GCC states are India's largest regional trading bloc partner, surpassing the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and the European Union. Part 4. As previously mentioned, the Indian subcontinent's maritime trade links with the Gulf extend back to the mid-3rd century BC. Archaeological digs in the modern-day Gulf region have uncovered a wide range of artifacts from the Indus Valley civilization from 2600 to 1900 BC that show close commercial connections with Sindh, the Punjab, Baluchistan, Kutch, and Gujarat. There's also clear evidence of Indus Valley influence on Gulf material culture. For instance, merchants in Dilmun, that is ancient Bahrain during the 3rd to 1st millennia BC, used the Indus Valley weight system with its unique weight units of measurement instead of the Mesopotamian weight system, indicating the extent of Dilmun's trade with India. Before the Arab conquest of Sindh in 711, commercial ties between the Gulf and India were close. But during the Abbasid Empire, the two regions became an integrated trading zone from 750 to 871. This was reflected in the common Arabic terms for the coastlines between Sindh and the head of the Gulf during the Sassanid and Abbasid eras from the 3rd to 9th century AD, the Ard al-Hind, or Land of India. During the same time, India's trade links with Al-Abullah, then Iraq's oldest port, were so strong that it was known as the Farj al-Hind, or the frontier of India. And similarly, Bushehr in southern Iran was known as the Darvaz-ya Hind, the gateway of India. These names were a reflection of the Gulf port's strong trade ties with India and the sizable Indian communities of merchants and tradesmen residing in these ports. Part 5. Because of the shortage of almost everything in Eastern Arabia, almost everything had to be imported. The largest source of imports and markets for exports was always India. The main ports and towns in India that merchants in the Gulf traded with varied over the centuries, as the table here shows. Most of the goods imported by Gulf ports, like wood, metal, cloth, rice, coffee, tea, sugar, ghee, and spices, were shipped from the ports on that table. The Gulf's few profitable exports were pearls, horses, and dates. Pearls were the backbone of the economy for Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the Trucial States, as the UAE was then known, until the 1930s. They were bought by Indian, Persian, and Arab pearl merchants and taken to Bombay, the capital of the Indian Ocean pearl market, between the 18th and 20th centuries. Part 6. The strong commercial connections between India and the Gulf over millennia naturally led to a strong Indian influence, clearly evident in Gulf material culture, from architecture and accoutrements to clothing and cuisine. Gulf dhows were built with teak imported from India. The houses of Gulf elites were decorated with Indian doors and furniture. Kashmiri shawls adorned the heads of many Gulf Arabs. Colorful Indian-style turbans were worn by the royal family of Oman, the ruling family of Sharjah and Ras Al Khaimah, and some Gulf Arab merchant families. Gulf Arabs ate their lamb and fish with curry and rice from India every day. In these and countless other ways, the Gulf ports and people were deeply connected with the world of India, while an Indian world, in the form of communities, existed among them. One of Eastern Arabia's greatest restrictions was the lack of wood for building material, especially dhows, since most of what makes life possible in Arabia had to be imported from overseas. The best building material for dhows was Indian teak from the Malabar coast, the coast of the state of Kerala, in western India. This is why Gulf Arab carpenters imported wood and even their carpentry tools from India. While the largest dhows, requiring plank sizes and amounts that were sometimes impractical to import, were built on commission by Indian carpenters in boatyards in the Malabar coast. The presence of Indian-built dhows in the Gulf, therefore, is quite ancient. The annual Dhow Festival in Qatar every November is the largest assembly of dhows, Gulf dhows, in the world. All of these dhows were built with Indian wood, and some were built by Indian carpenters in India, usually Kerala. The dhows not only connected the Gulf and India, their very origins was Indian. This connection was celebrated in 1980-81 when Tim Severin built a replica of a medieval dhow here in Oman, which he sailed to India and then China. One of the greatest symbols of wealth in the pre-oil Gulf was the large decorative teak doors that adorned the homes of ruling families and prominent merchant families in every Gulf port. The doors were usually imported pre-carved from Gujarat, a region famous for its carving industry and an ancient trading partner of the Gulf. The simpler, undecorated doors of humbler homes were made by local carpenters from cheaper wood, although still imported from India. A common furniture item in most Gulf homes was the Arab chest, such as the one appearing here, used to store clothes. But the main name is misleading, however, because the adjective applied to the owner, not the maker. Arab chests originated as an Indian copy of a Portuguese seaman's chest from the days of the Estado de India, Portugal's Indian Empire, encompassing Western India, the Lower Gulf, and East Africa from the 16th to 18th centuries. Most chests were made of Indian teak or rosewood. Many were made by craftsmen in Kutch, Gujarat, Bombay, and Kerala, although some were made by Omani, Kuwaiti, and Iranian carpenters using Indian materials. One of the most obvious examples of Indian influence on Gulf material culture is the Kashmiri shawl, commonly worn by Gulf Arabs and Yemenis since at least the 18th century. And there's actually a PhD student in Dubai, in Sharjah right now, from Stanford University, who's researching the history of the Kashmiri shawl in the Gulf, trying to trace its roots, its origins, and history. In Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Qatar, the Kashmiri shawl is worn as a headscarf with a head rope, the agal, to hold it in place. In Oman, Yemen, and the Emirates, it is worn as a turban, known as the musar in Oman, as shown here, and the amama in the UAE. Standard Kashmiri shawls are made from cashmere wool from Kashmir goats, while the finest and most expensive Kashmiri shawls are made from pashmina wool from pashmina goats. Kashmir and pashmina wool is much finer, stronger, lighter, and warmer than sheep's wool. While white shawls with a band of embroidery inset from the edge, like the one shown here, were worn throughout eastern and southern Arabia, colored shawls with extensive embroidery were also popular, or are also popular, in southern Arabia. Another headdress of likely Indian origin used by the Gulf Arabs was the multicolored cotton turban worn by the royal family of Oman, the Al Busaid, the ruling family of Sharjah and Ras Al Khaimah, the Qawasim, as well as the Hawala, a transnational Gulf Arab merchant community found throughout the Gulf and the wider Indian Ocean. Today, only the Al Busaid continue to wear such a turban, which they call the Saidi. It has a specific shape and unique look, specific to the Al Busaid. The Indian-style turbans worn by the others until the 1940s varied somewhat in color, pattern, and shape. Here are some examples of the Farouk family, a Gulf Arab merchant family, members of the Hawala. Part 7. The Indian communities in the port towns of the Gulf and the corresponding Arab communities in India's coastal towns and cities were and are a physical manifestation of the intimate connections between India and Arabia in every aspect of daily life. Oops, I think I'm missing something here. I'm sort of out of sequence. So the communities came from one of these four groups that you can see coming from Sindh, Kutch, and Gujarat. Sorry, my notes are out of sequence, or the slides are out of sequence. Oh, did I? Uh-huh. Oh, I did went back. Okay. Okay, that's what happened. Okay, that's, sorry, let me start over. Okay. Okay. Right. Sorry, let me start over again. The Indian communities in the Gulf port towns, the port towns of the Gulf and the corresponding Arab communities in India's coastal cities were and are a physical manifestation of the intimate connections between India and Arabia in every aspect of daily life. This is the Ratanshi Purushottam family business here in Muscat around 1910. They are Bhatia Hindus. Their namesake arrived in Muscat from MANDVI in Kutch in 1857. However, the first member of the family first arrived decades before that. My thanks to the family historian, Vimal Puricha, for providing this photo. These families were important both economically and politically. Here's a photo from 1911 of a durbar being held by the British political agent here in Muscat, Stuart Knox, with members of the Omani royal family in attendance. But look who is also in attendance. Members of Muscat's Bhatia Hindu community. And two of them looked familiar. So Vimal and I have corresponded about this. We think it's possible that they might be the same people or at least related. Archaeological evidence dates the earliest Indian communities in the Gulf from the mid-third millennium BC. Historically, Indian merchants belonged to one of these groups from Sindh, Kutch, and historic Gujarat. Before the dawn of the oil era in the 1950s and 60s, Indian communities in the Gulf were small and largely mercantile, numbering in the low thousands. Since the oil era, however, Indian communities in the Gulf have expanded dramatically to over 8 million people. Today, Indians form the largest expat community in each GCC state and even outnumber the national populations in Qatar and the UAE. The oldest Indian community in the Gulf today seems to be the Hindu community here in Muscat, which dates to at least the 15th century. The most prominent Hindu family in Oman, of course, today is the Khimji Ramdas family, who are also Bhatia Hindu merchants from the port of MANDVI in Kutch. The family has resided here since the 1870s. And their family business has an annual turnover of $1 billion and conducts business in both Oman and India. Part 8. Of course, there were also Arab communities in India. Arab communities date back thousands of years, like their Indian counterparts in Arabia. They were to be found in substantial numbers along the Malabar coast. This was because of the nature of the monsoon winds. Arab seafarers in Arabia, especially Oman and Yemen, had to wait for the next monsoon before returning to Arabia. These seafarers took wives and local wives, Indian wives, and over time, an Arab Indian community arose known as the Mapillas. Today, the Mapillas account for a significant number of people in Kerala and the majority of all Muslims in that state. This is why India's first mosque was established in Kerala at the town of Methila in the municipality of Kodangala in Kerala, the Chairman Juma Masjid, or Chairman Friday Mosque. It was established in 629 during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad because of Kerala's ancient maritime merchant connections with Arabia. I visited the mosque in December. Its name is derived from the title of the king of Kerala, the Chairman Paramal. The Chairman Masjid, Juma Masjid, is related to the grave of the king of Kerala in Salala, the Chairman Paramal Makam. The legend is that the king of Kerala, Chairman Paramal Rama Varma Kushakara, heard about the Prophet Muhammad from Arab seafarers visiting Kerala and traveled back to Arabia to meet with them to meet the Prophet in Medina in 622. In the presence of the Prophet, he converted to Islam. Later, he performed Hajj in Mecca, and he stayed with the Prophet for many years. Eventually, the king decided to return to Kerala with some Muslim companions, led by a man called Malik bin Dinar from Basra, to spread Islam in India. But the king died en route in Salala and is buried there today. Malik bin Dinar continued to Kerala, where he established 12 mosques, starting with the Chairman Juma Masjid in 629, which he named after the late king in Salala. These two places in Oman and Kerala symbolize perhaps best of all the ancient and profound connections between Arabia and India. This concludes my talk, but there are many subjects that I did not have time to touch on, such as how Arabia once formed part of the Indian Empire during the British Raj, and how the Indian rupee was the main unit of currency in the Gulf until the 1960s. So while I have barely touched the surface on what is a vast subject, perhaps I can address some additional aspects of the deep historical ties between Arabia and the Indian subcontinent in the questions. Thank you, and I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you, Professor, for that very in-depth look between both the countries. Would you mind shedding some more light about Arabs in Kutch and those ports, not just Kerala?
Right. Well, so it depends on the monsoon. So because Kutch is so close to the Gulf, it's possible to go and come back and return. So very little work has actually been done on the Arab communities in India or wider South Asia compared to Indian communities in the Gulf or Arabia. I mean, there is literally, I can count the number of publications on one hand, maybe two fingers. Very, very little has been done, except for the Mapillas. And I should clarify that not all Mapillas have Arab ancestry. The Mapillas are a sort of a large group. Some are, not all are Muslim, some are Christian. But many, nonetheless, do have Arab ancestry. But with respect to Kutch, it's a very good question, but the research has not been done yet.
Professor James Onley, thank you for your lecture. I have a comment and a question. I mean, we tend to look at India and Oman and the Gulf countries from the perspective of current boundaries. But I would like to emphasize that there was a shared culture. And related to that, there was exchange both ways. And I want to focus on, we know that there was Oman is actually ruling parts of Sindh, the Bani Munabbah, and the Bani Luay for centuries. And there were rulers of Multad and of Sindh areas. And we know that the science of the Greeks was transformed to the Hindus via Sindh. So could you just clarify that point and the shared culture both ways?
Okay. So while this is just the tip of the iceberg, I can give you some interesting examples of how profound the impact is going both ways. So the introduction of the Indian numerical system and the concept of zero was first, which today is known, ironically, as Arabic numerals, are in fact Indian numerals. They came first to the Gulf and then through the writings of Arab intellectuals were then introduced to the wider world. So this connection has been, that alone was quite profound. You have, of course, the story of Islam. Islam came to India from the Gulf. If you take a look, for example, at place names, you can see that there are quite a large number of place names which etymologically their origins are either Arabic or Persian. The concept of South Asia, or of India, or of Indians, I should say, as a people, as one people, was first realized or conceptualized here in the Gulf. While in India, everybody saw themselves as separate nations, and only did we have the emergence of Indian nationalism in the 19th century forward. But the idea of Indians being one people was, as expressed by even the term, originated here in the Gulf. So the two civilizations and peoples have influenced each other in quite profound ways, to the extent that they are literally cultural cousins. And in the case of the Mapillas, I mean, they are blood cousins as well. But the shared culture and exchange between them has gone on to influence the world as a whole. This is the birthplace of globalization. The trade between India, between South Asia and West Asia is the world's oldest cultural crossroads. So, but this is a field that is only now just sort of beginning over the last few decades to be studied for its significance. So I very high level, I know, but I could have also talked about a number of cases in which both Arabia and parts of South Asia were parts of the same polities, right? For example, the Abbasid Empire, but there are many empires in which they were one. I gave a recent example of the Indian Empire. But these polities are simply a manifestation of the deep cultural and economic ties between the two regions, the two peoples. So in the case of the British Raj, of course, the British arrived in India and they found themselves in the Gulf. Why? Because of the deep trade ties, right? And this is manifested by the use of the rupee from the late 19th century until the 1960s as the unit of currency in all the GCC states. And the historic use of the rupee has been fossilized in the exchange rate between the national currencies and the US dollar, in those cases where the national currency is tied to the US dollar. So for example, I live in the UAE. The UAE dirham, the exchange rate is 3.675. That is, it takes 3.675 dirhams to buy $1 US. That is the exchange rate of the dollar to the rupee at the time of the adoption of the dirham. So the old use of the rupee has been, therefore, sort of lives on in the exchange rates of the Gulf currencies with the US dollar. So I hope that sort of answers some of that.
So nice to hear from you, Professor James. You have been a long years doing the Arabs, Indian. My question about you're talking about the communities of India in the Gulf and the Arabs community in India. So do you think the Indian community in the Gulf is back to the Bronze Age or the Iron Age? Oh. I think the Indian because of the trade. So in Oman history we said the migration of Malik bin Fahd to Yemen, to Oman. But at that time, as you know, the Achaemenid Empire, they controlled the whole region. So do you think the Indian community, there have been maybe more than 5,000 in the Gulf states, as the Arabs also in India?
As historians, of course, we have to go by what records are left, same as archaeologists. And so the oldest written record that we have of a South Asian community is the one I showed you on this cuneiform tablet from the 24th century BC. But we can assume, therefore, if they were already there then, that they were also elsewhere. But if we take a look beyond just written records or archaeological records, and we look at scientific evidence, when I was talking about this cuneiform tablet once in a conference some years ago, a scholar from Delhi University pointed out there's scientific evidence that shows that the origins of wheat crops in Iraq show that they're originally from India, and that they date from the 11th century. They date from 11,000 years ago. So 11,000 years. So that's before writing and human civilization. So the connections between South Asia and West Asia are as old as time itself, I think. But we only have the evidence that is with us to reconstruct that story of exchange and migration. So if you step back and take a look at the two regions together, they are really part of the same wider region. The South Asian communities in the Gulf are really indigenous, right? They're not somehow foreign. That's how deep and profound these connections have been. In other words, they've always been here, always will be here.
Professor, Dr. James, thank you for this very informative talk. One of the challenges that I can see is across India, it's been multilingual states. So as a historian, your biggest challenge is to collect data that's not written in English. And even you have Spanish invaders who were there, you have the French colonies and the Portuguese. So now, in the age of internet, when everything can be compiled and translated and put together, what would you suggest is the best way to overcome this challenge?
Will that be, so in my previous job, I was the director of research at the National Library in Qatar, and I oversaw, I project managed archival digitization projects, the most famous one being the one with the British Library. And so I think for something like this, what you need is a large international project with regional teams who have access to local archives and who can read the language. I mean, it doesn't matter if the language is you're from the same language group as the text. If the text is several hundred years old, you probably won't be able to read it. For example, people in Holland today can't read the Dutch records on the Gulf because they're in Old Dutch. So you need to be trained in that. But there are people out there, but getting them together would be difficult. So I think an international project that would pull everybody together and then put everything online and slowly translate things. And we can use also things like AI to draw connections. It would be possible, I think, to do a detailed ethnographic study. Up until now, it's only been possible to do studies of individual communities. And I have attempted to do, one of the first Gulf-wide surveys. I did an very long book chapter on survey of Indian communities in the Gulf. I identified 36 different communities, and I looked at them over the course of 500 years. But this is really a synthesis of existing secondary publications. To really crack into the primary source material, you need to have a large international team of people working collectively or collaboratively in this way. It's beyond the ability of any one person because of the many languages involved and the question of access to archives, which is logistically very difficult.
And there would be so many personal correspondences in several languages. To collect those would also be a great challenge. Like you said, you get to meet somebody like Mr. Porecha, and he has to, contribute to this by the photograph. But it seems like a huge requirement is to establish such a international organization where everything can be put together over years and with regional teams.
Yes, and that's possible now with the internet and various things, but the question is ultimately who would fund that? That's difficult. But now we have a new emerging field of Indian Ocean studies, which is very vibrant today. And so it would take place, obviously, in that forum. But I think now, if you look at online resources for Indian Ocean studies, we are beginning to see this. So there was a recent study or project involving the University of Exeter, whereby they were taking legal texts from different languages across the Indian Ocean and digitizing them and placing them online and then having sort of commentary about them. So I guess the next phase is to get all this online, have rich metadata where you have commentary about it, and then eventually we can begin to synthesize that. But this is a very long-term project, but one that's very challenging because the nature of the records is such that they're not necessarily in state archives, which are open to the public. They're in private archives, and therefore sort of invisible. You have to, it's luck of the draw, or you have to network quite a lot, and then access is usually based on trust. That's very difficult. But we're now at the stage where such a project would be possible. Thank you.
Thank you. We'd like to thank the Indian Embassy and Ambassador for inviting us to such a very nourishing time. And we thank you so much, Professor James Onley, for your wonderful lecture. I don't know whether you will agree with me. As human beings, we have our matrimonial, practices. Civilizations also get married to each other. And since we are talking about examples of the influences, which you so nicely termed as cultural cousins, wouldn't you think that one of the most blatant and obvious and evident manifestation of this civilizational marriage between Arabia and India is the Hindi language and the Urdu language, which is so much interarticulated with Arabic. I would assume Hindi and Urdu is the daughter of that matrimonial civilizational marriage. In the same way we could apply this, we give a little bit, probably also an example to Swahili. Is also some, I don't know whether you agree with me. This is the evidence, because before that exchange, there was no Urdu, there was no Hindi. But it is, that manifestation of this civilizational marriage. So it brings us together much more, that we are, in the same destiny. And it makes us realize that we are, the oneness and the unity is more than we think. As much as we would like to go back to our ancient history and our prehistory, but, history is a discourse which is always evolving and evolving and evolving. Thank you so much.
Well, the obvious thing to look at how deeply profound the impact of India and the Gulf have been on each other is just take a look at the etymology of the word India, of the name India. It comes from Hind, of course, and its origins are Persian. And it's because in the Gulf, the whole of South Asia was originally sort of conceptualized as a single cultural unit. So that first conceptualization occurred here in the Gulf. So that's how, and then of course, Indians then adopted the name themselves. But so that shows you, alongside other names, Bharat, but it shows you how profound this impact has been. And the language is a good indicator of cultural exchange, right? And also a good way to dispel the idea of somehow cultural containment, where cultures live in sealed containers and can be somehow pure. So if you take a look at the Arabic, for example, there are over 2,000 loanwords in pre-Islamic Arabic in the Quran that are not Arabic, right? So that's because of the Arabs' contact with the wider Indian Ocean world through trade. Words like bustan, diwan are Persian, not Arabic, but we use them in Arabic. So, and Indian languages, look at the word Punjab. It's Persian, Punj, Ab, means 5 waters, the 5 rivers. So that shows you how profound these two, generally speaking, civilizational groups have had an impact, a very positive impact on each other, and why I say they're cultural cousins. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor James, for enlightening us with the centuries-old history of India and the Arab world. Sri Arun Singhal, sir, Director General of Archives, National Archives of India, has joined us for this evening. We welcome you, sir, to the embassy. I now welcome Mr. Munir Toprani to narrate the history of the Toprani family.
Good evening, everybody. Your Excellency, good evening. Distinguished guests, all family members, uncle, auntie, salam alaikum, Jai Shri Krishna. I am Munir Manubhai Toprani with my daughter, Arna Munir Toprani, who is the 14th generation of my family, on the soil of Oman, been at Sur Magam, or Majan, starting with Topan, Trikamdas, Boj, Rata, Dharsi, Parmanand, Anandji, Ramdas, Umarsi, Vallabhdas, Pragji, Narayandas, Manubhai, Munir, Arna. That's our 14th generation on this soil. That is our family house and my playground, my identity in Oman, Ramesh Bhavan, constructed in 1939 by my grandfather on the Matra seafront. Our family originally is a Kachi Bhatia origin family. As per the family history or the family tree, Trikamdas Toprani came in the end of 1650, around November or so, after Muscat was under the royal family, when the Portuguese were out, with the help of Mr. Navratan, who was a trader over here. Then the whole family made it a point that at least for 2 months in a year, they would do business on the soil of Oman and use Sur as a point to expand further also. For at least 2 months, from 1655, someone would reside in Sur. Because they had their own ships, they even went down to Zanzibar. So some of the route, as Professor James had shown. So their ships used to ply from Kanyakumari, Cochin, Mangalore, Goa, Bombay, Diu, Daman, Porbandar, Kutch Mandvi, Karachi, Gwadar, Hormuz, Sur, Zanzibar. Over a period of time, lots of things were exchanged. The family tree went on, like from Trikam, Bhoj, Ratta, Parmanand, Anandji. Around 1800 is when Umarsi Toprani planned to expand his horizons and come to Muscat. So around 1800, he got his first around 1806, he got his first land or his first residential space in Muscat. And that's how, from Sur, the family came to Muscat. But no doubt, it took more than 100 years to actually, for us to move to Muscat. We had our business going on, up and down, and till 1897, my grandfather, late Seth Narandas Toprani, came with his father at the age of 13 for the first time to Sur Maqam. Till 1904, he kept on accompanying his father, and in 1904, he decided that Sur is the land where he wanted to expand and progress his future. And from 1905, he stayed back in Sur. He didn't go to Kutch. That's how he created or planted our family tree into Oman. And as it went on, till 1905, Narendas Choprani was already a known business person to organize and get whatever supplies was needed by ships which were coming from Baghdad, ships which were coming from Beirut, ships which were coming from Bahrain, from Iran, from Zanzibar, etc., especially the small feeder vessels. He used to give supplies to them. And then in 1905, a Bahraini businessman arrived to Sur, and he asked for some gold coins. He wanted about 50 gold coins for his own use. And that's when Narendra started looking around for gold coins. And around 1908, he got connected with Marhum Abdul Munam Zawawi in Muscat, whose wife, Bibi Asma, had 5,000 gold coins which he wanted to trade. But because it was just 50 coins, so it was quite a bit for Narendas to manage, there was a brokerage fee of just 1 coin for that full trade. And that's when, in 1908, he collected the coins from Muscat without any agreement, just a sheer belief that this banyan will be most reliable. And then in 1910, there was an offer, in 1910, the Bahraini seafarer came to Sur, got his coins, and went back. And whatever supplies were there was straightway brought to Muscat by my grandfather and handed over to Marhum Abdul Munam Zawawi at his house. After that, that day, it was a late day for them, and my grandfather did not return back to Sur. He was asked to stay back that night for dinner. And that is when late Abdul Munam Zawawi flinged in a business offer to him to move to Muscat and have an agreement with him that our goods will not be offered by any of us in Karachi, in Islamabad, in Gwadar, in Hormuz, and Zanzibar. That was a very, very life-changing opportunity or an offer for my grandfather. From there, around 1911, my grandfather moved to Muscat, and he started his own business because he had business agreements with Marhum Salam Bahwan in Sur and Marhum Abdul Munam Zawawi in Muscat for taking care of trading their family goods, which used to come from India. So he had enough time, and he started learning English, or he got into English law. He became a certified barrister under the English law to practice English law in Oman. Around 1918 to 1919, he passed his law degree from England, and since then he became a licensed English law practicing barrister in Oman, in Muscat. He got married, sorry, I missed out. Narendas got married to his first wife, Manibai Dharamsi Sampat, daughter of DJ Sampat. They were the civil constructing family in Muscat in those days. Manibai passed away in 1921 or 23. And then my grandfather was asked by all the elders that you have 3 children, so you need to get married. And that's when my grandfather went and got married. In 1931, my grandmother, Shanta Devi Narendas Choprani, second wife of Narendas Choprani, was married. She was from Bhavnagar, and she came here in 1933. That is my late grandmother's first British passport, issued in Muscat, January 1933. That was my grandfather and my grandmother's joint British passport. I still have custody of these in original. This is my grandparents' Indian passport, first passport which was done from Baghdad in 1952. It was done from there and then received by them in Muscat. That's old Muscat for many people who are into history, etc. That's also old Muscat. The upper one, this is the Sidab Aqaba. And this is our Ramesh Bhavan. This is Greater Mathura in those days. That's Narendas himself, his kids from the first wife, my grandmother, second wife, their children. This is Madhu. This is my late father, Manu. Chote Bharat. This is Madhuri Fuiba. And Sarayu, sorry. This is Jebala. This is Bharat Kaka. That's my late father. That is me. This is my grandfather constructed and donated the 21-room Kinox Hospital, which was the TB hospital in those days, done for Dr. Wells Thomas, the American Mission Hospital. This is my father's certified birth certificate then by Dr. Wells Thomas. As Professor James said, this is the Indian rupee which was used in Oman. This is the copy of my father's British Bank of Middle East passbook with Indian rupee account. Till April 73, Indian rupee accounts were running under British Bank in Oman. That's the main gate of Muscat. This is the Markaz of Muscat, and this is the port side gate of Muscat. This is Wali Rasasi, Ismail Rasasi. This is the American family, the Woods family. This is American embassy. And this is Wali Rasasi's office. This is the Mathura Wali office. The gentleman from the archives, Indian Archives section, I give you a project. This part used to have a Kalka Mata temple, which has been buried. It is still there. If you want to explore, you can. This is the headquarters of Bethel Flag in 1928. This is our Bethel Flag airstrip. That's the construction of our present palace, done by Shapurji Palanji. I think this is Vimal Bhai's house, family house. This is the branch of Eastern Bank Limited in the Talib building in Matra. This is how Matra Bay and the Matra jetty was, the port. This is the cargo custom checking that is happening at Matra. Any questions, gentlemen?
Yeah, I'm a bit intrigued about the name of the hospital.
Yes, sir.
Where does Knox come from?
Sir, Knox was the name of the daughter of an American philanthropist. The name came up in 1904 originally, which started with only 2 rooms of a medical clinic. Now, over a period of time, around 1930 or 1931, Dr. Wells Thoms and his team later on came and took over. Originally, it was 1904, and then it slowly, it was just a public clinic, and then it progressed. Though around 1931-33, they had 4 rooms. No, Rahma came much later. Before that, it was Al-Sada, if you are aware. There were 3 names. No. There was a section of Rahma Hospital for some time which had the name of Sada. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Munir Bhai. Now, may I invite His Excellency, the Ambassador, to the stage to present a token of appreciation to Professor James Onley. May I also request Professor James to come to the stage. May I kindly invite Arun Singhal, sir, to the stage to receive a small token of appreciation from the Ambassador. May I also request Mr. Muni Toprani to come to the stage to receive a token of appreciation from the Ambassador. May I now invite Dhruv Purecha, who was our first family speaker for our first lecture, to come to the stage to receive a token of appreciation from the Ambassador. Thank you, everyone. I kindly request the dignitaries to be seated. As we draw towards a conclusion of our formalities, I request you all to take a tour of the painting exhibition. I also request you to join us for refreshments outside. Once again, I extend my heartfelt welcome and thank you to each and every one of you who joined us this evening. Thank you.